I agree with the top comment. If the dog dies, we riot. Welcome back, horror fans. I'm Leo, and Bootube Breakdowns is here to save your scary movie night. Right off the bat, Good Boy scores a 7.0 out of 10, which lands it solidly in our Pumpkin King category. But here's the thing. I've already had to battle a paranormal basement demon while tied to a doghouse just to get you this score. And in a few minutes, I'll show you exactly why this film earned its rating. If you disagree with my score at the end of the video, be sure to let me know how much you want to battle some supernatural entity in the basement of a haunted house. And then be sure to like, share, and subscribe about it in the comment section. The goodest of boys, Indy, protects his very sick owner, Todd. Todd decides to move into his grandfather's house in the middle of the woods to get away from his life and try to live out his days in peace. As time passes, it is apparent that some very malicious entity is living in this house and is going to go after Todd and Indy the same way it went after the previous resident, the grandpa. Literally just called Grandpa, and his very goodest of boys, Max. The story evolves into a slow burn story of Indy investigating the strangeness of his new environment and uncovering the dark mysteries of this house while trying to protect his best friend Todd from all the hecking scary things happening when Indy is left alone. The story progresses from Indy's perspective and culminates in one of the saddest endings in horror movies this year. At first glance, the story here is as basic and run-of-the-mill horror story as it can get. This guy moves into a haunted house, gets haunted, climax, resolution, scenes do their thing, the end. What is interesting about this whole project is that since this movie is done from the dog's perspective, we do not get a traditional storyline. Instead, we get a very curious doggo walking around noticing sounds and smells and investigating to defend Todd from danger. As such, we're left to put the pieces of the story together ourselves based on background conversations while exploring other things. It's not an impressive story by any means, but the delivery of it is what gave it that little push. I may be biased, but I think the story quality here deserves at least a 6 out of 10. The pacing for this movie works out rather well, all things considered. There's a lot of scenes here and there where Indy is just walking around doing dog things, and it helps immerse us into Indy's head by walking a mile in his, paws. That said, it may have relied a little bit too much on the dog immersion aspect of the story and neglected the story itself. There were a few parts where I was thinking, okay, let's get this going. And others where I was like, no, wait, show more of that. It's also a very short movie when you really think about it. Clocking in at 74 minutes, it's not so much that the movie overstayed its welcome, nor was it over too soon. It's that the timing of some of the elements were a bit awkward. I'm taking into account how working with a dog actor who doesn't know he's in a movie can significantly hinder what is possible. It was simply an interesting premise, but the execution was something that felt more awkward than I anticipated. Still, I think it did very well compared to similar horror movies, so I'm willing to give the pacing for this one a 6 out of 10. The fear score is actually kind of difficult for me to come to grips with. On one hand, I did want more shock and danger with the presence in the house, but on the other hand, they are working with a doggo friend who is not trained in acting in any way, and the director is obviously not going to push his own dog into anything traumatizing. Overall, this was a very standard, very basic horror movie, and at first glance, I would have given the fear factor on this one a 3 out of 10 and called it a day. However, looking back, the jump scares were proper jump scares, so there are no cheap scare deductions on this one, and the malignant presence does something I thought was really cool. The way Indy gets psychic visions from Max's bandana adds an interesting layer of fear that a dog would be extremely unsettled by. And of course, as a dog who does not understand what is going on in the house and is actually tormented by some disturbing memories, I can understand how Indy would be more afraid than us, jaded horror fans, might be in this whole situation. Yeah, I'm a sucker for dogs and I'm gonna be biased, but it's my channel and I say the fear factor is a 6 out of 10. Now fight me. I think the takeaway from this story is actually that point of view shots are a better fit for horror movies, and there are so many more angles to consider a story from. Let's start with the basics. The idea of a dog's perspective in horror is a stroke of genius. As the director Ben Leonberg himself has said, we always see in horror movies how the dog is barking at something in the dark and have wondered what it is. The movie does this perfectly, and the headline was believable for the first time ever. Indy was actually one of the most expressive actors ever. The story itself, presented as pieces in the background for the audience to piece together, was a breath of fresh air in a time where movies try to spoon feed you the plot. I appreciate Ben for respecting his audience's intelligence and just trusting that we would be able to put it all together. By the way, the ghost itself was actually menacing, and it is one of the best apparitions I've seen in cinema. There's also a fantastic post-credit documentary where Ben explains how the movie was filmed, and it's not just a fun little bit of history and filmmaking theory. It actually helped with the overall experience for anybody wondering if there was any shenanigans with Indy behind the scenes. Overall, this was a fantastic movie with an interesting premise that had fantastic execution, and for a passion project that cost a couple $1,000s, it comes to show that passion, talent, and hard work will deliver a better movie than simply having a bloated budget. As of me recording, I was hoping that this movie would make at least $5 million for all its efforts. So far, this movie has made $8.5 million. Not a bad debut for an amateur director, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye out on Ben's future projects. This movie's fun factor deserves a 10 out of 10. The ending for this one is actually really dark and sad when you take some time to think about it without pulling an A24 confusing, crying in the dark room for trauma BS. We learn that every man who grew up in this house gets an early death, as Todd is bouncing in and out of consciousness due to either delirium from his sickness or outright demonic possession. Indy is seen fighting, literally tooth and nail, to get back to Todd and protect him from the ghosts. He protects so good. A disorienting set of events happen that end up with Indy in the basement watching Todd getting devoured by the entity and being dragged deeper into the darkness of the basement. A few hours pass and Todd's sister Vera shows up, opens the outside cellar doors of the basement where Indy is waiting, and she starts calling for him. As this happens, there is a whistle in the basement, clearly from the entity, but in Todd's style, that calls for Indy to go deeper into the basement. It is one of my favorite cinematic shots where Indy is literally in pure darkness with only a ray of light shining on him, and Indy has to make the most difficult and brutally heartbreaking decisions. Do I go into the dark with best friend Todd, who's a good best friend, and give the best snuggles and needs my help? Or do I go with best friend's sister, who makes best friend sad, but smells like she really wants to help? I saw what happened to other dog when he went to save his best friend. Maybe best friend is gone. Maybe he was too sick. Maybe that noise is not best friend. Maybe I was not a good enough boy, and I could not protect best friend. I'm sorry, best friend. I love you. I will protect girl human friend from now on. I will miss best friend. Yeah, it's dark, depressing, and hits you right in the feels. Indy chooses to go with Vera, and the movie ends with a scene of Indy riding in the car. Normally, this would have been enough, but if you stick around for the after credit scene, there's a mini documentary where the director Ben Leonberg shows how the film was made. This is what brought the ending over the top for me. It was such a wholesome sigh of relief to know that Indy was nothing more than a silly dog doing silly dog things and was just playing around the entire time. It also showed a very wholesome perspective for the movie, that this was a pure passion project for the director, and Indy was having a ton of fun with this project. At first, the whole, oh, it's a horror movie from the dog's perspective thing is a gimmick, but it quickly became a masterclass at the notion that hard work, passion, and dedication beats bloated budgets every time. The ending is not perfect, but holy fuck do I want it to be. Still, I'm only going to give the ending here a 7 out of 10. So that's Bootube Breakdowns' take on Good Boy. Averaging our scores gives this movie a 7.0 out of 10, which places it in our Pumpkin King category. Do you agree with my rating? Scream your score in the comments and tell me what horror flick I should gut next. If this helps save your spooky vibes, smash that like, share with your horror crew, hit that notification bell, and subscribe to Bootube Breakdowns for more killer verdicts. Keep it creepy, and I'll haunt you in the next review.